Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to what will hopefully be quite an entertaining session. I know that we've got a very large number of attendees, so do come on in. My name is Trevor Watkins. I'm the Global Head of Sport at Pinsent Masons. We're a professional services firm with offices all around the globe, and I have a role of heading up our sports division. I also used to be chairman of AFC Bournemouth, a club that hopefully will win tonight and will be on the way back to the Premier League in the near future. Hopefully that gives me a chance to ask some interesting questions of our panel. We're very lucky indeed to have three very distinguished individuals. Paul Conway on the far side, Pacific Media Group. Paul has 7 clubs. We'll probably come back to... Six. Sorry, I read on the media it was 7.
Sold one.
So you got 6. And you've got a game in an hour, haven't you? Barnsley playing this evening?
They are.
So a game against Bristol City in the Football League. Omar here from City Football Group. No, let me get this right. 10 sides.
10 in a partnership with another one.
10 in a partnership with another one. And of course, Manchester City sitting high at the top of the Premier League, but we'll be talking about some of the other clubs. I was Andy Kohlberg as well. Real Mallorca, Phoenix Suns, so just the 2. Yep. But equally going to be very interesting because multi-sports. So we're going to have an interesting 45 minutes ahead. We do have some time to overlap at the end. From that perspective, if people do have questions, please do either raise your hand. I think a microphone may be able to come to you, and we can then come back to you and see what you might have to ask. But we're looking at multi-club ownership. So maybe we'll start with Paul. 6 clubs. Most people will be worried about the results of one club or how to manage one team. Why 6? What's the strategy that's led you to that point?
Fundamentally, we invest in clubs where we're having recruiting success. So, for example, we had some success in Denmark, and we want to recruit more Scandinavian players through a Danish club. So we met 12 different clubs, talked about our ideals, and we ended up with Esbjerg on the West Coast. So fundamentally, we're following our recruiting, and then we invest in a club.
And so, just for benefit of the audience, you're Esbjerg.
Yeah, so we're in England, Belgium, Denmark, Holland, Switzerland, and France. We've been in France twice now, in and out and back in France.
And from your perspective, again, just to help the audience, giving them a time scale, over what period of time have you acquired these?
Yeah, so we've invested in 7 clubs in the last 6 years.
So if we now look at just on the bounce across maybe to Doma, you have 10 sides, and plus the partnership. But what has been the rationale for City Football Group? And please do share a bit of the vision and the background to the teams.
Sure. So when we first started out the City Football Group expansion or concept, it was initially a commercial endeavor. It was really about trying to create a truly global brand that had a local presence. And the first franchise we acquired was New York City FC in 2012, and it was launched a few years later. But really the idea was to be able to connect with our fans locally in a meaningful way. We wanted to have a fixed presence in specific territories. So we started out with New York, then we expanded to Melbourne, then we developed a relationship with a club in Japan through our global partnership with Nissan, and so forth. And then I would say phase 2 of that development was probably a bit more football related. So we started developing our own style of football, our own training methodology, coaching methodology, and we felt that there were very synergies on a football perspective when we look at developing talent. So then we said, okay, where are the places that we can have a club that can help us tap into the local talent, to develop that talent locally with the chance of allowing them to grow and potentially move on to some of our other clubs. And that's why we started investing in clubs in South America with the team in Uruguay, Montevideo. And over the past 18 months, we've kind of also focused on Europe. So we bought a club in the second division in Belgium, Lomo, and a club in the second division in France, Troyes, which was promoted last year and now is in the top division. And again, we try to create those best practices and sharing of know-how, both on the commercial and the football side, to be truly global, but to also allow us to develop talent around the world.
And have you found that from that practical perspective, and Paul was talking about recruitment, that flow of players and talents, both on the men's and women's teams, has worked?
Absolutely. We've had players go from Montevideo to New York. We've had players go from the Man City Academy to our club in Spain and Girona, or a club in France recently. So I think what we find is that we have the ability to develop the pathway for those players based on their level, working with our local clubs and working with the local coaches and the practitioners to ensure that the talents, that their potential is optimized. And ultimately what we want is to be successful on the pitch. So I think that gives us this overview of all the talent mapping that we have, and we can work with them and then allow them to flourish.
And is that last question just at the moment, is that a centralized operation that you have a hub that works with all the teams and shares the data and the analytics?
Yeah, so every club has their own CEO and football directors. So they manage their clubs locally. What we do is that we have a central team that, if you like, accumulates that center of excellence and know-how and is able to then share it with our clubs so that they can benefit from the scouting services, they can benefit from best practices and data analytics rather than having to reinvent the wheel every time. And we think that generates probably a significant amount of efficiencies for those clubs at a local level. Like I said, they have their CEOs and football directors who take the decisions locally. And obviously they know the local markets better than anybody else. But they are able to benefit from these central resources that we have as well.
Thank you. And Andy, it's a little bit different. It's not all football. Right. It's basketball with, you're first in the Western Conference at the moment.
First in the NBA.
First in the NBA, and a game coming up shortly. And nearly, hopefully this year you'll win overall. Nearly got there last year. But you've also got Real Mallorca. Why go from Phoenix Suns and decide to invest into a La Liga side?
So we bought the Phoenix Suns in 2004 and bought Real Mallorca in 2016. And the basic investment premise for both of them was that basketball and soccer are the two sports over the next 20 years, and the past 20 years, that we think will continue to grow TV revenue because young boys and girls both play. You don't need a lot of income or equipment to play, and they're played all over the world. So we thought those were the three drivers in both sports that would increase TV revenue over a long period of time. The second theme was that we felt that in Spain, the gap between the biggest clubs and the smallest clubs in terms of TV revenue and other things would narrow over a decade or two, and the same thing between La Liga and the Premier League. So those were some of our premises, and it wasn't, the synergies are not obviously based on the sports side, but a little bit more on the business side. We have Footprint and PayPal, two Phoenix Suns sponsors that are also sponsors in Real Mallorca. And then we're trying to bring some of the fan experiences that we learned in Phoenix and try to offer that as an option to the Spanish fans of Mallorca. And we're not trying to change the culture of Spanish football. We're just trying to bring another experience. So we have 13 million tourists a year come visit the island. So we might have German tourists who's a Bayern Munich fan who comes to a Mallorca game. They're not really a Real Mallorca fan, but they're looking for a real unusual fan experience. So we have a VIP area where they can watch a game right on the pitch, have the best pizza in town brought in, and mingle with the players afterwards. So that's an experience you can't get in many other places, and some of the things we learned from Phoenix that we're bringing to Real Mallorca. But there's not a lot of synergy on the sports side.
And given we've been talking about 6 and 10 clubs in a partnership, why stop at 2?
Yeah, I'm feeling really inadequate up here with only 2 teams, but it's hard managing it, certainly from the U.S., but I don't think we have plans to grow a whole lot. I think what we've learned we can experience and share with Mallorca and vice versa, but some of the bigger clubs like Man City Group, I think are better suited to have multi club ownership all over the world. That's not really what we're trying to do.
And I mean, if we talk about Paul, I suppose if you've got 6 clubs, you're up and down maybe up and down according to who's winning and losing. How do you manage those 6 sides with your management team? Do you take a central role, and similar to where you have people in the different clubs?
Well, we have a uniform style of play. We have a similar strategy with all the clubs. We typically have the youngest or second youngest team in the league, so we're data driven on player selection. We're low cost. We watch every euro and pound, because we're all about sustainability. So our teams balance a budget when we, after player trading, after we get into a club, they're usually restructuring sometimes, and we have a clear path on how we're going to balance that budget. Like in Houston, when we got there 20 months ago, it was losing 7 million, and we completely changed the style of play. One of the older teams in the league to younger teams in the league. The team's profitable now. Last season, we finished 5th with the lowest budget in the league. And you just have to be really dedicated and firm to your strategy, because once you have some strategy drift, you're kind of screwed.
And how, for you, with your teams being mainly in continental Europe, how does that compare for you to the way in which teams operate and regulated in the US?
Well, as an American, it's kind of laughable when we get to Europe and we see teams going bankrupt. We see funds being stolen from clubs.
By who?
Everybody. So the first thing we get involved with the club is, all right, let's control the cash. Could be staff, could be other clubs trying to shake you down, could be agents. And so you got to control the cash first, and then you build from there. And then we commercialize, we have sponsors in multiple clubs, but the whole goal is got to get it to a balanced budget. Because once you have a balanced budget, then you have a good year in transfers, you're going to be able to grow that budget. A new €100,000 sponsor means a lot more to us than a team that's losing 100 million euros per year.
And just lastly on this bit, aspirationally, Paul, for your sides, what are you hoping they'll achieve? Is it clubs you want to build up so they get into the top division in each league, or are you?
Yeah, so our whole philosophy starts with balance the budget, grow within your league.
And one more question, just as an investor, what term do you look at when you go into a club? How long do you think you're going to be in there for?
Well, when you balance a budget, you can have a long term, because we've never had a capital call in 6 years.
Incredible.
Now, that does get a little bit of volatility. But we're very clear when we get into a club, it's like, this is what's changing. We give everybody locally a chance. We're going to a high press. We're going to younger teams. And then we often get a lot of efficiencies on the non-football side. We give everyone a chance, but then we ask people what their job is. Some people don't even actually know. And so we give them a chance, but if they're not on the bus, we usually, like in Belgium, we went from 21 non-football staff to 11, and our commercial revenue's up. And it gets easier to manage sometimes with less people.
I mean, Omar, for you, City Football Group, obviously, New York City FC, hugely successful, Manchester City, hugely successful. Do you find ever that with the clubs, only you're trading players, that the fans look at it and say, well, we support Yokohama, we're a poor relation? How do you make sure all the clubs feel equally important and valued?
No, every club is important for us. I mean, to your point, Mumbai is also a champion in their league. New York won it last season. Man City, the women's team recently won the cup. So we really spend a lot of effort and time on every single club. It's true that depending on the size of the club and the amount of resources that you can dedicate to it varies a little bit. But in every environment, we try to give them access to the best know-how, and we invest in the facilities as well. We've invested significantly in our club in Uruguay and in New York and Melbourne, where we've created or tried to replicate the City Football Academy that we have in Manchester, but at a smaller scale, because we do believe that investing in the facilities, investing in the right people, investing in the right leaders will make us more successful. So by no means do we treat one club with less attention than the others. I think it's just that the competition obviously at Man City is much higher, and therefore we have to be sure that we're on the front foot and everything that we do at Man City, because it's the European football in its current state now is so hyper competitive that we can't take our eyes off the ball. But like I said, we're champions in 4 different countries and our 10 different clubs around the world. And that's the goal, is to continue being successful on the pitch, with a long-term view in terms of the financial sustainability. And that's done, again, through lots of effort in terms of the marketing and CRM and developing that fan base, developing those relationships to generate content for our fans, but also for our sponsors, to continue reinvesting the upside that we generate into our clubs. So, I think, even Yokohama, the one that you mentioned, won the league 2 years ago domestically. So I think we're quite proud of the success that we've had across all of our clubs, but every single market is a challenge. We hardly get any sleep on the weekends because there's always a club that we have to worry about. Recently we were worried about our club in Belgium because it looked like they might be going down from second to third division. Our club in France is, again, fighting not to get relegated, and it's an entirely different circumstance. New York operates in a salary cap environment, and that's very different to what you find in Europe, where there's a direct correlation between wages and success on the pitch. You have promotion and relegation. So we try to develop local expertise across all of our clubs to make sure that they're all successful, or as successful as they can be.
I mean, Andy, taking that point Omar's made, he's looking at 10 plus 1. You've just got the 2. In terms of managing and the cultural fit, what things have worked and what things have you found you've been surprised by and had to work out with the clubs?
Well, I think from a cultural perspective, across sports, a winning culture is pretty much the same. Whether it's basketball, soccer, I played professional tennis on 8B Tour. What makes a great athlete successful is the same across sports, the competitiveness, the drive and things. So I think trying to build a winning culture is very similar no matter what sport it is. So there's certainly unique things to Spain, the way business is done in Spain and the way players and athletes react and the way they work and train is different in Spain and in soccer than in basketball. But I think what we're trying to do is just build a winning culture, which, as I said, is very similar. Doesn't matter what sport it is. The role of a general manager in basketball is very similar to a role of a sporting director in soccer. The role of a coach is very similar across the two sports. What makes a great coach? I mean, Pep Guardiola has the same characteristics in terms of winning as Greg Popovich, for example, same mindset. So a lot of those things are the same, and that's what we're trying to do is just build a winning, sustainable winning culture.
And you mentioned the fan community. Have you found much interaction digitally and commercially between the fans of the two sides, showing the interest in the other sports? I know you touched on it earlier.
A little bit. One of the objectives of the Phoenix Suns is to expand the Hispanic base. Obviously, Arizona has a big Hispanic population, and that ties in a bit with Spain. We're in the early stages of it. We have a really great social media team in Mallorca. I think we're 7th in La Liga in terms of social media hits and engagement across social media, and we're the 17th team in the league, but we're doing much better in terms of social media. So we have a good team in place. There's some crossover between the two teams in terms of that, but marketing partnerships we think has a lot of runway in the future of collaboration between the two clubs.
And taking that forward, Paul, when you're looking at allocating the resources between your 6 sides and how you're planning season on season, you find that a hard task? And you're trying to work out exactly where you should invest and how you should take things forward?
Well, we're in the volume business. So last summer, we signed 45 players.
Wow.
But since we're balancing a budget and we're using analytics, we made probably 200 offers to get to those 45 players, and then probably looked at 2,000 players to get to the 200 offers. So one of the biggest inefficiencies we see in the sport is, we got to sign that left back. Oh, there's lots of left backs. They're all over the place. And there's good players all over the world. And so we just signed a player from Jamaica for Esbjerg. And a big part of this is also on visas, because there's good players everywhere, but then they have to play at the right appropriate level. And then they have to be able to get into the country. But this is also, it can be done, players on the upside and then players getting a little bit older too. And so we've moved a player from England to Belgium to France, and someone we still like, but we look at the correlations between the leagues, and we still want to keep them. We just tell them about a new adventure.
But is it very much an economic project for you?
Yes.
Purely and simply, can I buy low, sell high?
No, can you run it as a business run it sustainably, and then our belief is similar in Nice. Someone will one day give us an offer too good to refuse, and then we can invest in another club in the league.
And you said, I mean, you sold a club and you did sell at a profit, and that's given you more ability to go out and do it again.
Yes.
It's interesting that comparing to the City Football Group model, where you've had the clubs, you've built them up. What is the strategic aim? What's the objective of having those 10 teams in the partnership that you have in place?
We really want to be, truly global, multinational football organization, present in various markets. If you were to ask me now, what is the limit? I'm not sure what the answer is. We will probably continue growing. There's some regulatory limits in terms of clubs being able to compete in the same competition that obviously we have to be aware of. But I still think there are a few markets we'd like to have a presence in, whether through full ownership of a club or a partnership or maybe a minority stake. But our long-term goal is to be a truly global football organization that has multiple successful teams around the world with the City brand that has shared values across the globe that fans can relate to, be it through content, through our partnerships, or through the football that they see on the pitch. One of our dreams is that people would be able to recognize a City team without actually seeing the shirt, just by seeing how they play. To your point about the winning culture, we have not just a winning culture, but a style of play that is very important to us as well. So I think it's our ownership has this long-term view of where it wants City Football Group to be, and I think even though it's been 10 years, I think we're still very much at the beginning of that process.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating when we're sitting sadly in a world where sanctions are being imposed for some very sad acts that are going on, and we're seeing obviously the Chelsea process playing out as to where that will put a benchmark for clubs in the Premier League. But for you, Andy, when we're looking again at this idea of multi-club ownership, you've taken this step with 2 teams. And listening to many people in the room, I know we've got people from Hibernian and Hartford and various other clubs. For those who are thinking potentially about what do they do with their club, what's your do's and don'ts when you're looking at acquiring another team? What did you find out from Real Mallorca?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to say about other teams, but we joked years ago that we bought a 100-year-old startup. So we really had to put in a lot of infrastructure and build the club up all the time, going up and down between divisions. We've been in 6 divisions in 6 years. So, it's been a challenge. I'm not sure I've got great advice for people. Every club is different. Every location is different, but every clubs are run very differently. We have a long-term view, and we really, as Paul said, we want to always be sustainable, but increase the value of the club. Obviously, over 17, 18 years now, Suns have increased in value. We want the same at Mallorca, but we're not looking year to year. We're looking to build value over a long period of time.
I mean, do you find it hard? I mean, obviously you lost to Real Madrid, who are a massive side. There's still Super League rumbling on there. Do you find it hard to compete in La Liga? There's obviously been a lot of changes with private equity coming in.
Well, it certainly is difficult because the rules, if you're promoted, you're likely going to have one of the lowest salary structures of any club in La Liga, and you have to outperform that. And so you kind of have to hit above your weight, and that's a challenge. It can be done. I mean, we beat Real Madrid 2 years ago. We beat Atletico Madrid in December. So in soccer, anything can happen on a given day, but over the course of the season, we have to be consistent and have a winning mentality. So that's a challenge.
Exciting, and obviously well placed being in La Liga next season as well. I mean, Paul, from your perspective, when Pacific Media Group go in, is it the same ownership group that owns each club? So
there's general commonality.
And when you're doing that, how easy has it been for you to find the right management, the right teams to go in on and off the field for the clubs that you have in place?
Well, the first, so I'll just use like the Denmark example. We met 12 different clubs. Why did we end up with Esbjerg? Because even if we're getting control of all the clubs, if your values and views are different, so we went into Denmark saying we want the best Danish players and Scandinavian players to play through our club. And we met plenty of clubs that said, oh, no, we're recruiting in Croatia for our Danish club. Like, oh, that doesn't make any sense for us. And some clubs want to just continue to lose money. That doesn't make sense for us. And so even if we have control, when you have local investors and also local sponsors, if there's just a different view on strategy, it's very, very hard to work. So we end up in situations where there's shared beliefs and shared values, and we move on from things that just don't work.
And without being so much of a loaded question, because we were speaking the other day, what are the leagues where you found it easiest to operate, and where have you found the most challenges?
Easiest France, hardest England.
Why England being hard?
We're in the championship, which is full of cheating clubs, and the average wage to turnover this year is like 167%. So you have clubs that are willing to cheat left and right. And so one of our big themes, and we're doing this also in Belgium, we're trying to invite more of our American friends into the league, because especially if they have experience in US sports, because they don't want to get into this just to lose money for 10 years. And so you have clubs in the second division in England, there's 6 or 7, they've lost 200 million pounds in the last 6-7 years, and they keep on going. So that's hard. And so we're always pushing for reform in the leagues and to stop anti-competitive behavior. Some leagues are much more focused on it, but I think it's getting a little bit better in England, but still it's very hard.
And do I take it from that if you get other like-minded individuals into the leagues you're investing in, then the hope is those leagues will change and become shaped more by colleagues?
Well, they become more professional. So, like, for example, we're in Belgium and 80% of TV revenue goes to 5 clubs. That's not fair. So you're trying to bring sustainability, and you're also trying to make the leagues truly competitive. And cheating all different ways is not good for valuations, because that's the reason why, and Andy will tell you, US sports are so valuable. It's just very well run, and there's very, very tough regulations. And if you do something wrong, you should probably lose the club, or if you're an executive of the club, you may go to jail. And what we see in a lot of European leagues is just crazy.
Well, it's a moot point for those of you who know that if the English government are thinking of trying to regulate English football, why or how we've got to that point. But we'll stay away from that because we talk for hours on that. Omar, from your perspective, listening to what Paul said, I mean, you've spent a huge amount of time building up these structures. For the people in the audience that might be thinking, maybe I'm going to buy another club or I'm going to expand, what are your main recommendations for the model for success? What would it look like?
I think you have to understand the market really well before you go into it. I think you need to have the right level of knowledge, if you can find a really good partner that can help you navigate through kind of the local market, the local politics. We have experiences in complicated markets like China, but fortunately we have China Media Capital, who's a shareholder in the group, who's been tremendously helpful. We have Silver Lake in the U.S. We work, the New York Yankees are a minority shareholder, and New York City FC. So I think a lot of it is about not being arrogant, coming in, assuming that you just know the market better than people that are there in the day-to-day. I think we have a certain amount of knowledge from a central perspective. We understand the football industry really well at a global level, but ultimately I think you have to be well advised locally, and I think people shouldn't underestimate the amount of resources and time and dedication that goes into managing multi-club, multinational organization, because it's It's highly competitive, it's highly demanding. It's also a very passionate industry. So we talk about clubs as entities, but in reality, you have fans that have that emotional connection with their clubs on a day-to-day, and they want you seeing contributing to that success. You can't just assume that you can take your eye off the ball for a while and not let it compete at the highest level. So I think that level of emotion always has to be taken into account, and it has to be managed well. So it's been a very interesting journey for us so far. As I said before, it's probably just at the beginning, but we're constantly learning. And we've made some mistakes. We've learned from it. We've backtracked. We've moved forward again. But all in all, I think it's just that the level of dedication that we put into developing this model over the last 10 years has been enormous.
Roughly speaking, how many people do you employ globally within the group, including the players?
About 1,000 people.
1,000 people. So really quite a significant body to manage, and tremendous success that's come as a result. Andy, is it a sound business strategy, listening to our debate, to go for multi-club ownership? Is it the future?
Well, I think it depends. What Citigroup has done is really difficult. Merging different cultures in different countries is a real challenge. They're obviously doing it well, but they're a big group, well-funded, so I think it takes that effort. For smaller investors, I think it's tough, but as Paul said, one of the things we looked at is the strength of the league itself. Some of you may not know, but the NBA stands for nothing but eternity.
But it's extremely well run. Adam Silver and David Stern have done a great job over the years running the NBA, very strict with a lot of rules. Everybody follows them for the most part. And I think that benefits the ownership over long term. And I think our belief is that the European
Football clubs can in that direction, but the NBA is exceptionally well. People follow.
rules for the most part. So I think that in the long run helps everybody.
So we may have Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not sure how much you're able to hear.
We're just a little bit.
It was amazing. It was
I think to Paul's point that when the leagues are well run and people follow the rules, I think it helps everybody. It helps the league, it helps TV revenue, it helps the investment. We think there's a lot to learn globally from some of the American sports. Obviously, it's a different structure. With the NBA, the clubs actually own the league, whereas in European football, that's not the case. But there are some things that rules and centralization and some things can I think help European football, and it will help not just the leagues but the players as well as the teams and their overall value and increase investment over time.
Thanks, Sandy. Paul, as we're getting towards the end, and we'll make sure there's time for some questions. From your perspective, you've given a lot of very interesting thoughts, very poignant. What would you like to see happen within the regulation of football to encourage you to carry on investing? What are the changes you're looking to see?
You can look at how different leagues are regulated and find the best of the lot. So Spain, for financial fair play, I think does the best in Europe. When you go to France and the support for academies, why does everybody recruit in France? Because there's great academies. But why is that? Well, there's a lot of supports. So you pay some decent taxes in France, but you also get some government support. So there's elements. And then for letting in new investors, no one really is that strict. And that's not good. If you're already invested in the league and anybody can invest, it's not good, because when you see questionable people coming in and running teams into bankruptcy, it's just like if a house on your street goes into foreclosure. It's not good. So it's there in bits. And so you can see where success works in certain leagues.
Omar, just in terms of the opportunities, you said you're not sure what might happen next, by my reading of it, because you have these clubs. Where do you see opportunities for carrying on the City Football Group journey? And it's very exciting, but what next?
Yeah, I think that there are maybe two elements to it. One is that we can continue acquiring more clubs. I think there are still certain markets that we don't have a presence there yet that could be quite interesting for us from a commercial fan development, but also football. We're not present in Africa. We have a club in Uruguay, but there are countries like Brazil, Argentina that are quite attractive for us as well, which I think there's some opportunities that can come up. But we're also diversifying our investment and our strategy. We have a partnership with Sapphire Fund. We have a sports fund where we're one of the anchor investors because we want to be able to be first movers in new technologies that can come in and help us be more efficient and develop better relationship with our fans, or to the point that Paul was making about data analytics. So again, that's an important area for us. We're looking at football education as potentially an area of growth. We also have an investment in a company that does recreational football, five-a-side football. So we are fundamentally a football club, a football organization, and that's what we're going to stick to. So we're not going to be a multi-sport organization, but within that, we do want to invest in technology. We want to invest in education. We also have now recently launched a sports institute to deliver kind of master's level programs around business administration of football clubs. So those are all areas of growth where we have a potential to continue growing, and it's a bit trial and error. We'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll continue learning.
Andy, from a strategic perspective for you and the Suns and Real Mallorca, do you see yourselves going into other areas, other opportunities, or is it really making these two teams work?
First and foremost, making these two teams work. I think if some other opportunities came along that lined up well with that, we'd take a look at it. But we're not trying to be a multi-team, multi-sport owner across the board as a strategy.
Thanks, Andy. I'm conscious of about 3 minutes at least on the clock. Are there any questions in the audience? Gentleman here in the first row.
How do you guys manage the conflict between P&L benefit for selling a player or transferring them throughout your system of different clubs? What's the governance like when you're thinking about what to do with a really talented player?
So the question, if I paraphrase it, is when you've got a player and you're looking at transferring, are you more interested perhaps in selling him externally or her externally, or keeping the player within the group and benefiting a team? Paul?
Maximize value.
Maximize the money.
Maximize value.
And that will depend by consideration of how valuable that player is to the team you may move him to, or her, and the team he's at or her's at.
Well, if someone outside is giving an irrational price, we'll sell.
Good. Omar?
I think it's a constant balance. I'm not avoiding answering the question, but it really is. It's a discussion we constantly have. Is obviously there's a financial sustainability element of it, and we want the P&Ls to meet their financial targets, but we also want the ability to generate revenues, ensure that the teams continue performing at the highest level. We have had situations within the group where it's not necessarily the choice between selling or not selling, but we have gone to maybe one of our clubs and said, for the development of this player, we recommend that they go to another club, or that they continue maybe perhaps in an MLS and they need to go to Europe to continue their development pathway. And sometimes that can be a bit of a friction between our football directors, but we never impose anything. It's all about recommending and advising. But it's not necessarily a trade-off. It's always a bit of a nuanced balance that we have to find with all of our clubs.
Do you have anything you wanted to add there, Andy, from a Real Mallorca perspective when you're buying and selling?
No, we had a couple of Suns players we thought might make a good goalkeeper, but we haven't had that problem yet.
Any other questions out there? There's one right at the back there. Let's know if there's a microphone. There's one here first, sorry. And then gentleman at the back.
Hi, you guys keep saying investment, obviously, so I would like to know what you guys think about investing in women's football. And when you acquire a new team, do you pay attention to the women's football team that's already there, or possibly creating one? And is there any financial value in investing in women's football?
So consideration of women's football side, do you invest in it, and what value do you attribute?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it's a good long-term investment, but then you also have to look which countries are really embracing it, both from a regulatory perspective and a commercial perspective. And so, like, we have a friend that's launching a a women's team this year, they're already at 14,000 season tickets. And so you can really build a sustainable business around that. But in some countries, there's very little government support. I think there's been growing support in England, but it's been inadequate, I would think, in the past.
We're true advocates of women's football. So we have two of our clubs have women's teams, Melbourne and Manchester, who have been very successful on the pitch. Clearly, women's football, if I look at it from an England perspective, over the last few years, hasn't been financially sustainable. We've had to invest significantly, but we've tried to give really the same level of access in terms of facilities, coaching, sports science, data analytics to our women's team as we have given to our men's team. I think now we're finally starting to see the business side and the commercial side starting to catch up. Prize money is going up, broadcasting revenue is going up, the UEFA Champions League is being restructured, and again, we'll see that growing. But I think historically you've had various teams that have invested a lot at a loss with the view of the long-term growth. But I think my sense is in the next 5-10 years, women's football is going to be not just financially sustainable, but actually quite profitable. And then obviously from the perspective of fan engagement and development of football in general, we see this as key. We have a women's academy in the US and the UK and Australia, and we plan on continuing investing.
The Phoenix Mercury is our women's team. They've been very successful, won 2 WNBA titles. We got to the finals last year, and Diana Taurasi is probably the greatest woman basketball player ever and one of the best competitors, any sport, male, female, you'll ever see. In Real Mallorca, we don't have a women's team yet. We first feel like we need to stabilize in La Liga before we consider that. But I think, as they both said, women's basketball and soccer, I think, has a bright future and a more sustainable business model. The Mercury lost money for years, but now they've turned the corner and I think have a longer path toward profitability. And I think the same goes for European women's soccer as well.
There's a question just at the back.
So Ben Barber here from Edinburgh Uni. So you've seen players progress from different clubs within different under the same ownership. How much do you see coaches being able to be part of that as well?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So that's one area we're really focused on getting better at. So we look at the group like Red Bull, and they've done a very good job progressing coaches. And so we use analytics to recruit coaches, and we've sold 5 sets of coaches in the last 3 years. But our issue right now is what comes next, and then we have to go out and recruit another set. So we looked at Red Bull as it's a really good model of they have a lot of young assistants, and then also through the academy that can then are given the opportunity to step up at a young age.
Same, Omar?
Yeah, same for us. It's part of our kind of long-term development strategies to have coaches coming through the system and coaching different teams within the group. We have examples of Patrick Vieira, who coached our what's called the EDS, or the under-23s in England, that came and coached NYCFC. We've had Nick Cushing, who was the head coach of our women's team, now is an assistant coach here again in New York. So it's definitely an area of development for us. And with time, the idea is for players to become coaches, to go and develop in different clubs, potentially even becoming football directors as well, because as I said, it's part of that philosophy that we're investing so much in.
And have you seen much, Andy, in terms of transference between the two sides, or not as yet?
I think the fundamental qualities that make a great coach go across sports, as I said earlier. But I think the key is finding the right coach for the right group of players at the right time, because you can have a perfect coach for one set of players of where you are in the evolution of the team that's not great at another time. So that's what makes it difficult, but great coaches are incredibly, incredibly important to a winning culture.
Any more questions? We've probably got time for one more. We are over time, but if there are no more questions, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to Paul, Omar, Andy, for a fascinating session. Thank you.